Hannah's POV. Raya! I cried again as I ran to the bed, tears flooding over my features. Sebastian was close behind me. I touched her bruised face, and she stirred in her sleep. I breathed out, relieved that she was alive. Her clothes were completely torn off, and the only thing covering her bare body was a thin sheet that lay on the bed. She opened her eyes and focused on me, tears welling up in her eyes. She must have been in complete shock from the looks of her. I couldn't blame her. "Oh, Raya," I whispered, my voice quivering as I held back a sob. She lifted her head slightly to look down at her body, and she started trembling violently. I wrapped my arms around her and held her close to her, refusing to let her go. Sebastian stood nearby, silently, allowing us to process what had happened. "What happened to you?" I whispered to her. She couldn't speak. After a little while longer, I turned to Sebastian with tears clouding my vision. "We need to get her out of here," I told him. He nodded and grabbed another, smaller blanket from a shelf, handing it to me. He turned away so I could wrap her body in the blanket. She allowed me to cover, but flinched if I touched a bruised section of her body. She stayed silent as I jumped off the bed, allowing Sebastian to scoop her into his arms. She flinched, looking frightened, but she allowed him to lift her as her body trembled violently. We returned to the dorm in silence. Sebastian waited in the room while I took Raya into the bathroom and started the bath. She sat on the ground as we waited for the water to heat up. She held her legs close to her chest and rested her head on her lap. She remained silent. I had never seen her so broken before, and my heart tugged painfully for her. I removed the blanket that covered her and helped her into the bathroom. She sighed as the warm water soothed her aching body and cleaned off her bruises and other wounds. I sat with her silently for a long while and allowed her to cry until her heart's content. "Raya," I whispered to her. Her eyes flashed in my direction, but I knew she wasn't fully there. "What happened to you? Who did this?" She looked like she wanted to answer me, but no words came out of her mouth. "If you told me, maybe we could." "No." Her voice was hard and unfamiliar. The forcefulness of her tone startled me. She didn't sound like herself. "There's nothing anyone can do." She fell silent again. I wanted to argue that it wasn't true and that with Sebastian's help there was plenty we could do. But it didn't seem she wanted to talk any longer. I couldn't blame her. I left the bathroom to join Sebastian in the dorm while Raya finished with her bath. He allowed me time to silently process my thoughts. "Whoever did this," I said, keeping my tone low. I was unable to finish my sentence. I clenched my fists in fury, trying to keep my wolf calm. She wanted to find out who hurt Raya and rip their throat out. She wanted them to suffer for what they did. "We will find them," Sebastian assured me, wrapping his arms protectively around me. "I promise." "How did you know I was in trouble?" I asked, peering up at him through misty eyes. "I heard you plead for help," he told me. "Through the mind link." "I mind linked you?" I asked, confused. He nodded slowly. "Why don't I remember that?" I asked him with a worried frown. "Your wolf probably reached out to me on your behalf while you were drunk and frightened," he answered, sounding slightly annoyed. "It's true. It's part of our mate bond," Nora confirmed. This was going to take time to get used to. I knew it bothered him that I was drunk, and I went to this party without saying anything to him about it. But after everything that had happened, I knew he wasn't going to scold me about it right now. Nora stirred, and I knew that was the truth. I felt slightly embarrassed to have to call him to rescue me, but if he wasn't there, it would have been a lot worse. Who knows what could have happened if Sebastian didn't show up and put an end to the attack? Raya opened the bathroom door. She was dressed in the pajamas I left out for her. Her face was pale, and her eyes were bloodshot from the crying. Her hair was soaking wet and dripping down to her shoulders. She walked like a zombie, and I could only imagine how much pain she was in. She had scrapes, cuts, and bruises all over her body. Looking at her, Nora grew impatient and even more furious. We wanted more than anything to find the bastard that did this to her and put an end to his miserable life. She bit onto her bottom lip to keep from sobbing as she made her way over to her bed. She sat down and stared down at her lap. Her body still trembled slightly as she remembered the events that had just taken place. "How are you feeling?" I asked her. Her gaze lifted, and she met my eyes. Tears welled up in her eyes. Awful, she admitted, trying to keep her tone from quivering too much, but she still didn't sound like herself. Whatever happened to her, I knew it was going to change her, and it broke my heart. You should get some sleep, I told her, motioning for her to lie down. Would you be able to sleep? She scoffed. If someone did this to you. I touched my fingers to my neck, feeling where Sebastian had marked me by force. I suppose not, I said after a long pause. I wish you would tell me what happened, Raya. She was silent as she slipped into her bed, more tears welling up in her eyes as she glanced over at me. Not tonight, she whispered. She lay down and turned away from me in her bed, facing the opposite side of the room. Her body shook uncontrollably as she allowed herself to sob. You should sleep too, Sebastian told me, keeping his voice low and respectful. I nodded and lay down as well. Just as he was about to stand from my bed, I wrapped my arms around his arm and kept him still. Can you stay in here for tonight? I asked. He looked worried for a moment, like there was something else weighing on his mind. But he nodded and draped his fingers through my hair, caressing the back of his thumb down the side of my face. Yeah, he said softly, I'll stay with you for tonight. I smiled weakly at him and closed my eyes. I worried I was going to have another nightmare again, but maybe with him nearby, it wouldn't be as bad. Sleep overcame me, and I allowed myself to relax for the night. I woke up the next morning and groggily looked around the room. The faint sunlight shined through the curtains on the window. Raya was still fast asleep, thankfully. But my heart sank into my stomach as I realized that Sebastian was gone. Sebastian's POV. Tonight was the night of the full moon. If Sebastian stayed at the school, regardless of if Hannah was there or not, there's no telling what he would do. He woke up with a sense that something terrible was going to happen. He was already feeling his migraine brewing, and he was becoming irritable. He hated having to leave Hannah, but he needed to get to his moonstone scepter and chain himself in his dungeon. The moonstone scepter was kept in his nightstand. It was the only thing that weakened his powers and made it so he wasn't as strong. He doesn't even remember how he received the scepter. After the war with the vampires, when the madness started, he was suddenly in possession of the scepter. Of course, he had heard of the scepter and all that it was capable of. It was one of the most powerful things on the planet. It once belonged to the moon goddess. He has no idea how he ended up with it. But he kept it locked away in the nightstand so no one could get to it, which is why he was shocked when he returned to his room, opened the nightstand drawer, and saw that it was gone. How could it be gone? Eric demanded to know, but Sebastian had no answers for him. It wasn't possible. It couldn't have been possible. Magnolia, Eric hissed. Fury started boiling through him, and Sebastian clenched his fists. Closing his eyes, he attempted to take in a few deep breaths to try and calm Eric before he lost control. It was way too early in the day to lose control, and he couldn't do it unless he knew where the scepter was. Magnolia was eating in the dining hall with her son Jack when Sebastian barged into the room. He knew his eyes must have been scarlet, and there was irritation all over his face because the kitchen servants went pale. They were looking around, trying to find an escape route out of fear that he would lose control and kill each one of them. Magnolia didn't look as frightened, though. She looked more annoyed than anything. She put her fork down and placed her hands together on the table as she peered up at him. "What honor do I have for this intrusion?" Magnolia asked. Her tone was icy, and it only made him angrier. "You know damn well why I'm here," Sebastian hissed through his gritted teeth. "Where is it?" "I don't know what you are talking about," Magnolia said, eyeing him carefully. "Stop lying," Sebastian growled, the forcefulness of his voice echoing through the dining hall. The servants were visibly trembling, but it didn't seem to faze Magnolia. "What are you talking about, Sebastian?" Magnolia hissed. "The scepter in my nightstand." "Where is it?" Sebastian growled again. "Scepter?" Magnolia asked, raising her eyebrows. "Don't play stupid," Sebastian hissed. "The moonstone scepter. You knew I had it!" "Moonstone scepter?" Magnolia gasped, standing to her feet forcefully. "You had possession of the moonstone scepter, and you lost it?" "I didn't lose it. You took it." "No, I didn't," Magnolia said, keeping her eyes steadily on him. She was lying. She had to have been lying. Who else would have taken the scepter? Sorry to interrupt, but didn't your Luna just recently leave? How do you know it wasn't her that took the scepter? Jack said, leaning back in his seat. Hannah wouldn't have, Sebastian hissed at him. She didn't know it was there. Neither did we, Magnolia said, her tone hardening. I knew she was a thief. She isn't a thief, Sebastian yelled, slamming his fists on the table, making the nearby servants flinch. How do we know it wasn't her? Magnolia asked. Because I know. We can't take any chances. If she stole the scepter, there's no telling what else she stole. We should have the guards go to her and search her, Magnolia insisted. You aren't going near her, Sebastian roared. He turned to leave the dining hall. Clearly, he wasn't going to be getting the answers he was seeking. I'm going to send guards there just to investigate, Magnolia said. I won't go near her, but someone needs to. He slammed the door shut as he left. Beta Arnold was standing nearby as Sebastian left the dining hall. He knew better than to get in Sebastian's way when he got like this. But he was also one of the only ones who chained Sebastian in the dungeon. He was ready to take on that job, but Sebastian worried he was going to break through the chains if he didn't have the scepter. I need a favor, Sebastian said, breathing heavily as he tried to control his irritated wolf. Something is missing from my room, and Magnolia seems to think that Hannah had something to do with it. Do you think she has something to do with it? Arnold asked. Of course not, Sebastian snapped. But Magnolia is sending guards to Blue Moon anyway to search Hannah's belongings. I need you to go with them and keep Hannah safe. Arnold nodded. Of course, Your Majesty, he said. What will you be doing? I need to get chained and in the dungeon, Sebastian told him. I just hope the chains will be strong enough to hold me. Hannah's POV. Are you going to tell me who did this to you? I asked, eyeing Raya from across the room. I woke up to Sebastian being gone this morning, and as the day went on, I was growing worried for him. But I was more worried for Raya. She had these dark bruises around her body and cuts along her jawline and collarbone. I managed to bandage her the best I could, but she still looked ghost-like. She was a bit more functional the next day, though. Classes and work has been cancelled due to the tragic attack. So, we were spending the day doing homework. She kept herself focused, trying not to think about what had happened the night before, but I knew she needed to talk about it before fully moving on from whatever happened. I couldn't sit there silently anymore. I needed to know who did this to her. It sickened me to think this monster did this and is walking around free somewhere. It doesn't matter, she muttered, not looking up from her desk. It does matter, Raya. He's still out there. He could do this to someone else if he isn't stopped, I told her, trying to keep my tone firm, yet compassionate. It doesn't because I can't remember his name, she breathed. She stopped her homework so she could face me. I don't know who he was. He was just a guy that attacked me. I was so drunk, I don't remember what his name was. Do you remember what he looked like? I urged. He had a scar, she told me, motioning for her face, across his face. Her face was grim. I felt my heart stopping in my chest. The man with the scar. I saw him too. He was the guy that ran into me. He was coming from up the stairs. I knew something was going on with him. He was part of the attack as well. I found myself struggling to breathe as I thought of the events from last night. She jumped at the sound of a knock on the door, and we both stood. I went to the door and opened it. I wasn't sure whom I was expecting at the door, but it wasn't Beta Arnold. I narrowed my eyes at him, confused as to what he was doing there and where Sebastian was. He opened his mouth to say something, but his eyes found Raya from across the room, and he stilled. Mate, Hannah's POV. Mate, I asked, staring between the two of them. Raya took an unsteady backward, her face showing pure terror as Arnold came into the room. He hasn't taken his eyes off her. Raya is your mate? I asked again, trying to process what was happening. He didn't answer. He stepped closer to her, analyzing her every move and her every feature. He stared around her body. He was in deep thought. I knew to him it was like they were the only two in the room, but to Raya, she wasn't sure what to make of the situation. She was just attacked the night before by a man at a party, so I couldn't blame her for being frightened or even confused. Why are you bruised? Arnold asked, his eyes darkening as he continued to assess her body. What happened to you? She looked like she wanted to respond, but no words came to her. I tried to avert his attention away from her because she wasn't ready to talk yet. Why are you here, Beta Arnold? I asked. He glanced at me briefly before turning back to Raya. Who did this to my mate? He growled, his face turning red. Someone at a party last night, I told him. There was an attack. She was attacked? Arnold asked, peeling his gaze away from her to address me. By who? He demanded to know. I saw the fury flashing through his eyes. Out of the few encounters I've had with Beta Arnold, I never thought of him as the angry type. He acted as Sebastian's assistant most of the time and typically kept quiet. I'm sure this was new territory for all of us. We don't know his name, I told him, but he had a scar on his face. I'll find him, Arnold hissed, cutting off my words. We will find him, I agreed, taking a step closer to him. But tell me why you're here. Where's Sebastian? At the palace, he muttered, turning his attention back to Raya. I noticed she hadn't taken her eyes off him. As frightened and confused as she was also in awe of him. He didn't come back with you, I asked, worry in my tone. Why? Tonight is the full moon, he explained. He needed to chain himself before his madness took over. Why did he send you here? I asked, getting annoyed that he wasn't giving me a direct answer. I decided to step in front of Raya, breaking their eye contact so he could focus his attention on me. It was like breaking through a trance. He blinked a few times, confused as to where he was for a moment before meeting my eyes. Answer me, I ordered, trying to keep the firmness in my tone, but some fear snuck through as my words trembled slightly. I need to know why he sent you. Something was stolen from the king, he finally answered. Magnolia seems to think you are involved. What? I breathed. That was ridiculous. Before he could say anything more, another knock sounded on the door, making us all jump. It was much louder and had way too much force. I thought the door was going to break off its hinges. Arnold stepped in front of Raya, protectively, and she flinched away from him slightly, but she stayed behind him. I gave her one look before turning to open the door. Just as I got the door open, I was being shoved aside and 3 of the King Pack's guards were storming into the dorm. What is going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice from quivering. Queen's orders, one of the guards said. I'm the queen, I told them, folding my arms across my chest. One of the guards stopped and looked at me. Queen Magnolia, he informed me. I felt the life draining from my features. At that moment, it felt like I was manually breathing. My breath was hard, and a dizzy wave fell through me. I stumbled away from them as they searched the dorm. What did they think I stole? I turned to Arnold for answers, but he was watching the guards carefully. I realized Sebastian probably sent him to make sure they didn't cross any boundaries. I promise, I whispered to Arnold. I didn't take anything. Arnold didn't say anything in response. He was too busy focusing his attention on the guards and keeping Raya safe. She looked even more frightened, and I tried to give her a reassuring smile to calm her. But her body was too tense. She looked like she was about to cry. What the hell is this? One of the guards said. He was holding one of my notebooks that I've written my research in for Sebastian. I felt my heart beating rapidly against my chest as he faced the picture of the moonstone scepter on the page. Is that? Arnold began to ask, but his voice trailed off. Why do you have this? The guard asked. The forcefulness of his voice startled me. I tried to say, was that what went missing? The moonstone scepter? She must have been the one to take it, the other guard said. Arnold shot me a shocked look. He had possession of the moonstone scepter? Arnold gasped. And you knew? I didn't take anything. I was just doing research. I tried to explain, but they didn't look like they believed me. The king said it was locked away in his nightstand. How did you know it was there? One of the guards asked. I found it. I breathed, trying to keep the tears from spilling from my eyes. I found it, but I put it right back where it was. I didn't take it. You can continue to search my stuff, but you won't find it here. The queen was right, another guard said under his breath. She's a thief and a liar. If she said she didn't take it, I believe her, Arnold said, stepping forward. The king will have your head if anything happens to his Luna. We have direct orders from the queen if we find anything suspicious. We need to take her in. another guard said firmly. From the looks of it, this is quite suspicious, one of the other guards said from the background. I felt all their eyes on me. I took an unsteady step away from them. This wasn't looking good, and I didn't know what else to do or say to convince them otherwise. The thought of holding that much power in my hands was too much for me to handle. I could hardly even hold it without it leaving a burning sensation on the palms of my hands. I couldn't even hold it for long. The queen ordered that we bring her back to the palace if we find anything, the guard repeated. This is definitely something. She obviously knew where the scepter was and was curious about it. We need to bring her in. Please, I whispered. I didn't take anything. We still need to bring you to the queen. She will be the one who decides your fate. Hannah's POV. Queen Magnolia was in the foyer when we entered the palace. The guards dragged me in by force. Arnold came in soon after, and Raya trailed in cautiously. I imagined that being inside the king's castle was weird for her. She looked nervous, and I couldn't blame her for that. Magnolia looked like she wanted to laugh as I was presented in front of her. The guards showed her my notebook, and she pressed her lips together in a firm line as she assessed the picture of the moonstone scepter. So it was true, Magnolia said, looking from my notebook into my face. You took the scepter. No, I said firmly. I didn't take anything. I was only researching it. How did you know about it? She asked, eyeing me carefully. My voice trailed off as heat rose into my cheeks. I found it. In his nightstand, where he keeps it locked? Magnolia asked, raising her eyebrows. I know how it sounds, but if she won't talk, I can make her talk, Jack said, stepping forward with his eyes darkening. With all due respect, Sebastian would kill both of you if anything happened to her, Arnold chimed in. Raya was peering at me nervously from behind him. I tried to give her a reassuring smile, but I knew I probably looked just as nervous as she did. Lock her away downstairs, Magnolia muttered, turning away from me with disinterest on her face. I swallowed hard. I knew the dungeon was downstairs. That was also where Sebastian was chained, from my understanding. I could only imagine what it was like down there. Before I had the chance to say anything in my defense, the guards were dragging me away from the foyer and towards the doorway that led down the stairs and into the dungeon. I was met by a darkened room that only had a few dimmed lights hanging from the ceiling. The dungeon smelled of mildew, and the ground seemed moist to the touch. There were a bunch of cells in a row with thick metal bars to hold wolves inside. Each cell had a set of chains on the wall. I imagined Sebastian hooked up to the chains in his own cell, and I had an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't see him in any of the cells, but I could hear him. His roaring echoed through the dungeon, bouncing off the walls and vibrating the under my feet as we walked. I shivered uncontrollably as his roaring grew louder. There was a separate door on the far side of the dungeon. I knew he had to have been held inside. I could feel his presence within that door, and I knew he could feel mine. I nearly tripped and fell to the ground as I was shoved into the cell. The doors clamped shut, leaving a ringing sound in my ears. I felt tears burning in my eyes as the guards started walking away. I knew there was no escaping. I was too weak, and my body was too tired. I tried to mind-link Raya because besides worrying about Sebastian and worrying about my own fate, I also worried about her. But because of the cuffs that remained around my wrists, my mind-link was being blocked. I just hoped Arnold was keeping her safe. I still couldn't believe they were mates. I sat against the cold concrete wall and pressed my knees to my chest, burying my face into my lap as I cried. I lost track of time being in the dungeon. I couldn't see outside, so I couldn't get a sense of how long I'd been there. Eventually, I cried myself into a night of sleep. When I woke up, Sebastian's roaring and growling were gone. However, I could still feel him nearby. I'm going to prove her innocence if it's the last thing I do. Sebastian hissed. I could feel his fury even without my wolf. Magnolia won't get away with this. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were lurking in the shadows nearby. It must have been the next morning because he was no longer chained in the next room. She had research on the scepter in her notebook, Arnold said, keeping his voice low. Did you know about this, Your Majesty? There was a pause where I knew Sebastian was wondering about it as well. I felt tears welling up in my eyes again. He feared he would think of me as a thief. I was unable to speak to let them know I was awake, and I was too tired to defend myself. She might have been researching it, but I know she didn't steal it, Sebastian finally said after a long pause. I know her. She's not a thief. If you believe that, then I believe you, Arnold said, sighing with relief. I believe him too, Raya's small voice chimed in. She was sounding a lot better than she had the last few days. I felt her warm presence nearby, and I was relieved she was all right and still by Arnold's side. I should have known he would have protected her. That was his mate after all. I've only known her for a few weeks, but she's the closest thing I've had for a friend in a long time, Raya said softly. She's not a thief. She's a good person. There was more silence that followed her words. There's no use standing around. I'm going to investigate. Raya, stay with Arnold. He will keep you protected, Sebastian ordered. Yes, Your Majesty, Raya agreed, her tone uncertain. If you need us to do anything, let us know, Arnold said as he led Raya from the dungeon. Once Arnold and Raya were gone, I could feel that Sebastian was still nearby. It must have been the morning after the full moon because he wasn't in the middle of his madness. I could hear his deep breathing, though, so the effects probably hadn't worn off all the way. I knew the irritation lasted a bit beyond the full moon for him. Sebastian? I whispered, not trusting the extent of my voice. He sucked in a sharp breath and came out of the shadows, making himself known to me. His body was tense, but his deep blue eyes were filled with so much worry that it made my heart melt. Tears welled up in my eyes again as he rushed toward my cell, grabbing onto the bars and holding them tightly until his knuckles had gone white. Hannah, he whispered, I'm going to prove you innocent. I know, I said to him, trying to keep my voice from quivering. I hope you know I didn't steal anything. He was silent for a moment, like he was weighing everything he knew so far. I saw the questions surfacing on his face, but he didn't ask me anything. He nodded and brushed his thumb down the side of my face, making me tremble under his touch. I'll prove you innocent, he said again. Trust me. I wanted to trust him, but there was still a part of me that didn't. I worried that he was just going to hurt me once again. He might not have gotten Emily pregnant like she said he did, but he did forcibly mark me, and that left a lasting impression on my heart and my wolf. We still feared him in a way, even though we knew he would also protect us. I breathed in his comforting scent and allowed myself to relax. I knew he wouldn't stop at anything until he proved my innocence. I had to trust him at least with that. He left, and I felt more alone than ever. Hours had passed as I'm sitting in the cell, playing with my fingers and waiting for it all to end. Then I heard the doors of the dungeon swinging open and a couple of footsteps walking toward me. I knew it wasn't Sebastian or anyone I was comfortable with. The aura and energy of the room shifted, leaving an icy feeling in my body. I saw his dark and large shadow first, and I scooted back on the ground until I was against the far side of the cell, against the wall. Jack made himself known to me, along with one of his guards. He grabbed onto the cell bars with his fingers and stared directly at me as he spoke. If you won't talk, I'm going to make you talk. What are you going to do? I whispered, my voice sounding unfamiliar. The guard unlocked my cell for Jack to enter, and I felt my heart falling into my stomach. My body trembled violently as he made his way closer to me. A wicked grin spread across his face. I need answers, and you are going to give them to me, he told me, keeping his eyes locked on mine. I told you everything already, I said in return. I don't believe you for a second, he hissed. He motioned for the guard to grab me. He did without hesitation. He grabbed my arms, pulling me to my feet and lifting me in the air like I was nothing. He treated me like a rag doll as he walked me to the other side of the cell and toward the chains on the wall. Fear was overcoming me as he placed the chains around my wrists and my legs, keeping me bound to the wall. The chains tightened, making it impossible for me to move, despite how hard I tried. Jack waited patiently for the guard to finish with the chains and backed away, allowing Jack to confront me. Tell me the truth, Jack said in a low and threatening tone. Did you take the scepter? No, I said with a firm voice, hoping to get the point across. Without warning, Jack swung at me, and the nail of his wolf sliced through the flesh of my cheek. It stung immediately and intensely as blood spilled from my cheeks and down the nape of my neck. I shuddered, but I bit my lower lip to keep from sobbing. "Did you take the scepter?" Jack asked, his lip curling up in disgust as he looked around my features. "No, I didn't take anything," I said weakly. He swung again, but this time his wolf claw missed my face and cut through my shoulder blade. I screamed out in agony as blood soaked my blouse. He didn't ask another question before jamming his other fist into my stomach. I thought I was going to throw up, but managed to hold back. "Please," I whispered. "I was only researching. I didn't take anything." "Stop lying," Jack roared, his eyes growing so dark they were nearly black. I knew at that moment that his wolf was taking over, and he was going to lose control. What would happen to me if Jack lost control while I was chained to the wall in front of him? Would he go as far as to kill me? "I'm going to ask you again," Jack hissed, his breathing growing more intense. "Did you take the moonstone scepter?" "No," I said again. "I didn't take it." He swung again, but this time his hand was balled into a fish, and he was swiping at my cheekbone. I heard it cracking under the force of his punch, and I cried out in pain. I knew I was going to bruise and swell quickly. As tears fell from my eyes, the saltiness mixed in the wounds on my face, stinging them and making them hurt even more. "You are the only one besides Sebastian who knew about the scepter being on his nightstand. You obviously found it if you were researching it." "I did find it, but I didn't take it. I put it right back in his nightstand and locked it up," I cried. "Then where did it go?" Jack asked, anger fueling him. "I don't know," I cried again. "I don't know. I've been at Blue Moon. I haven't been here." "The time of it going missing is unknown. Sebastian noticed it because he needed it for the full moon, but it was gone," Jack told me through his tightened jaw. "Stop lying," he roared, shaking the dungeon with his vocals. He disappeared around the corner for a moment, leaving me to pant against the wall. I shook uncontrollably, worried about what he was doing and what else he was going to do with me. My blood was dripping on the ground below me, pooling together to make a puddle. By the time he returned, I was feeling a bit lightheaded, like I might pass out. He was holding a wooden baseball bat. My eyes widened with shock. He said nothing as he swung the bat at me and hit me in the center of my torso. I coughed and vomited all over myself from the force of the bat. He stared at me with disgust on his face as I released the contents of my stomach onto my clothes. He scoffed as he swung the bag again, hitting me in the stomach once again. I didn't have much more to throw up, but my entire body felt weak. "Are you going to finally speak the truth, or do I have to continue hitting you?" he asked, hatred lingering in his gaze. I kept my eyes closed, trying hard to maintain my focus and not pass out completely. I was having trouble breathing, and I wasn't sure I would be able to speak even if I wanted to. But I managed to lift my gaze to meet his and keep my eyes locked on him. "If you kill me," I breathed, "Sebastian will kill you." He scoffed again and dropped the bat onto the ground. "You might be right about that," he said, "but once you are found guilty, you will be sentenced to death anyway." He shrugged as he said that last part. "I haven't been found guilty yet," I muttered, still trying to keep myself from passing out. Jack motioned for the guard to unchain me, and he did without hesitation. As the chains were released from my body, I fell into the puddle of my blood. I coughed as I held my aching body, rolling over onto the ground in agony. "Not yet, but you will be," Jack said with a grin. "I'll be back to get more answers from you." Sebastian's POV. Sebastian spent most of the day locked away in his study. He was trying to research everybody that had access to the scepter the last few days. Anyone with the motive to frame Hannah. Anyone who could have known the scepter was on his nightstand. He heard familiar voices outside his study door, Magnolia and Jack. He knew right away that they were talking about Hannah. "She won't talk," Jack muttered, sounding annoyed. "I tried everything." "You didn't try hard enough," Magnolia hissed. "I did everything but kill her," Jack told her, making Sebastian shoot to his feet and rush toward the door of his study. "What the hell did you do to her?" Sebastian asked, stepping into the hall. Neither of them looked fazed or surprised that he was there. "I did what you're too coward to do," Jack growled. "As the king, As the king, I order you to leave my Luna alone, Sebastian roared, cutting off his words. You will never get answers if you don't do anything. Jack said in return, narrowing his eyes at Sebastian. I'm doing everything I can to prove her innocent, Sebastian said through gritted teeth. I mean it, Jack. Leave Hannah alone. It doesn't matter, Magnolia said, interrupting their argument. I'm calling for the trial tonight. I'm getting the judge to join us in our courtroom, and we will see if she's innocent or not. I'm not ready, Sebastian told her, peeling his eyes away from Jack to glare at Magnolia. Well, you have until tonight. If she really was innocent, it shouldn't take you long to gather evidence. I already have evidence of my own, along with key witnesses. Impossible, Sebastian hissed. The trial is tonight. Whether you are ready or not, Magnolia growled. Hannah's POV. Get up, thief, a guard said from the doors of my cell. I opened my swollen eyes and tried to peer through the darkened atmosphere. I could almost make the shape of the guard standing before me. He was bulky and towered over me in an intimidating manner. His aura was darker than the room itself. I knew he wasn't one of Sebastian's guards. He had to have been Jack's. I struggled to stand to my feet. My entire body was bruised from when Jack beat me earlier that day. I grabbed the edge of the concrete wall and pulled myself to my feet. The guard stared at me, shaking his head with disgust. I'm too weak, I muttered, trying to keep the weakness out of my tone, but I failed to do so. I coughed immediately after speaking, and I tumbled back to the ground as blood escaped through my lips. He must have damaged my ribs if I was coughing up blood. Your trial is starting soon. You need to get to the courtroom, he ordered. There were no emotions in his tone. He had zero compassion for someone who was as injured as I was. He didn't care that I couldn't even stand on my own and that I was coughing up blood. Wait, did he say the trial was starting soon? A trial? I asked, mimicking my thoughts. Already? Queen's orders. Of course it was. I shouldn't have been surprised that Magnolia would want the trial to be sooner than later. I wondered if Sebastian had evidence to prove my innocence. He wouldn't go ahead with the trial unless he was prepared. Right? As much as I wanted to believe that I had an unsettled feeling in the pit of my stomach. Let's go, he said, aggravated as he grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. He led me through the dark dungeon and up the stairs until my vision was invaded by the blinding lights of the palace foyer. As we walked toward the back end of the palace, I caught the eyes of Caroline. She looked pale and worried as she stared around my damaged body. I could only imagine what she must have been thinking at that moment. I wanted to say something to her, but the force of the guard pulling me along with him was painful to the bruises on my skin. I could hardly move on my own, let alone speak. I wasn't sure how I was going to get through this trial. As we reached the courtroom and entered, everyone turned to me and they gasped. Sebastian's POV. What the hell happened to her? Eric hissed as Hannah walked into the courtroom. Her eyes were nearly swollen shut, and he couldn't imagine she could see well, if at all. She had dark bruises and gashes all over her body, including her jawline. Her clothes were ripped, and she looked almost dirty, probably from the dungeon grounds. It was a miracle she was able to get to the courtroom at all. He then noticed how forcefully the guard was pulling her along with him, and it started to make sense. Who did this? Eric growled, fury boiling through him. Sebastian was nearly shaking with the urge to let Eric loose on everyone in the courtroom. He was infuriated at the fact that his chosen mate was in such poor conditions. He scanned the courtroom until his eyes landed on Jack, who sat in the front, beside Magnolia. Jack's beady eyes never left Sebastian's face. That bastard, Sebastian muttered to his wolf. He did this to her. Eric was itching to escape and tear Jack apart, but Sebastian took in a deep breath, attempting to calm him. He knew it was no use, though. Eric was too strong for a couple of deep breaths to soothe him. He pulled his eyes away from Jack to focus back on Hannah, who was watching him through her swollen eyes. There was something about her that instantly started to calm his wolf down. He felt a wave of tranquility washing over him, and he was able to ease himself back into his seat. The guard brought her to the front of the room where she sat nearby. She glanced back up at Sebastian nervously. He could tell she had so many questions but was too afraid and too weak to speak. He tried to reassure her with a gentle smile, but he knew the smile didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't sure of the outcome of this trial either. He was completely unprepared to go against Magnolia. He knew in his heart that Hannah didn't steal the scepter. He isn't sure why she was researching about it and how she found it in the first place, but he knows she didn't steal it. Magnolia and Jack were up to something, and one look at Hannah's damaged face and his thoughts were confirmed. The judge sat at the podium, going over all the documents that were presented to him before he stood up and addressed the rest of the courtroom. Luna Queen Hannah is being charged with the crime of stealing a powerful scepter from the Alpha King, the judge began. Before the scepter went missing, Luna Queen had left the Wolf King anticipating a divorce. Is that correct? Yes, Magnolia spoke up quickly. We have the divorce papers she signed as evidence. Hannah visibly tensed in her seat. Sebastian clenched his fists to keep himself calm. I see, the judge said, staring at the papers at the podium. It says here that you had suspicions of her thievery and sent warriors to search her belongings and came across an image and some research on the same scepter that went missing. That is correct, Magnolia said, glancing over at Hannah with her darkening gaze. Did you actually find the scepter? The judge asked. Magnolia pulled her eyes away from Hannah to address the judge. No, she answered. That isn't the point. The point is that the scepter went missing at the same time Hannah decides to leave my stepson. It isn't a coincidence. But you didn't actually find the scepter? The judge asked, raising his eyebrows. It doesn't matter if it was found or not, Magnolia hissed. She's been lying to us this entire time. The scepter was locked away. Nobody but Sebastian knew where it was. She somehow found it and kept that information to herself. Do you honestly believe she just looked at it and put it back? Yes, Sebastian said, standing to his feet. He kept his eyes locked on Magnolia. That's exactly what I think happened. If you have no proof that she stole it. She researched it, Magnolia growled. Research isn't proof of anything other than curiosity, Sebastian shot back. You have no case here. This trial was a mistake. There was a witness, the judge interrupted. It stated on this paper that one of your maids witnessed Hannah taking the scepter. Excuse me? Sebastian asked, turning his attention to the judge. The maid, Rosalie, the judge said, reading the paper. Magnolia had a smug look on her face as she folded her arms across her chest. Rosalie? Sebastian had never heard of a Rosalie. Then again, Magnolia was constantly hiring new servants every time a servant turned up dead. So he wasn't surprised that he didn't know this specific one. But did she really witness Hannah stealing the scepter? A small maid stood from her seat in the crowd. She looked oddly familiar. He must have seen her around the palace after all. She walked to the front of the courtroom and stood near the podium. She looked a bit lost, like her mind was elsewhere. Then she spoke, and her voice rang with familiarity. Sebastian suddenly realized who this girl was. She was the sister of that young servant boy that died in the kitchen from Magnolia's hands. Sebastian's POV. Rosalie was the girl that was screaming in the kitchen when she found her brother's dead body. Magnolia killed her brother and tried to frame Sebastian for the crimes. He hadn't seen this girl since, so he assumed Magnolia allowed her to take a leave of absence, or maybe even let her go. He couldn't believe she was standing before them as Magnolia's key witness, though. Surely Magnolia didn't pay her to go against him like this? Rosalie looked nervous as she scanned the courtroom. Her eyes found Magnolia, and her entire body tensed. Something was going on that Sebastian didn't know about, and the thought was irritating. One look at Hannah's confused face showed that this whole thing had to have been a giant lie from the beginning. Please state your name, the judge ordered her. Rosalie, she said. Her voice was soft and quivered as she spoke. Rosalie Parker. And what is your business at the palace? He asked. She was hesitant for a moment. She was really nervous. I'm a maid, she said hesitantly. I came here with my brother. Your brother is also a servant at the palace? The judge asked. She tensed again and she gazed down to the floor. He was, she whispered. He is no longer alive. What caused his death? The judge asked. Her body stilled for a moment. She turned and gazed up at Sebastian. The pale blues of her eyes darkened till they were nearly black. It must have been her wolf taking over. He could see the fury and the pain crossing her features. Her brows furrowed together as she glared at him. She still believed that Sebastian was the one that killed her brother. That must have been how Magnolia convinced her to go against him. She was out for blood, and she was going to get it any way she could. She was grieving the loss of her brother. Sebastian couldn't be upset with her for that, or blame her for her actions going forward. However, Magnolia was taking advantage of her, and he could be pissed off at that. He broke his eye contact with her and glared at Magnolia, who was giving him a sly grin in return. She knew what she was doing. It was sickening. "I see," the judge said. She didn't have to answer for him to know what she meant. He cleared his throat and shuffled through some of the papers on his podium. "Magnolia mentioned that you went to her because you saw something you feared you shouldn't have?" Rosalie finally turned away from Sebastian to face the judge. "Yes," she answered. "I saw the Luna Queen taking something from the Alpha King. I got a weird feeling when I saw the item, and it frightened me." "Walk me through the events of that night," the judge told her. "I was completing my nightly duties when I heard them yelling. I hear them yelling a lot, but this time it seemed particularly bad. I was told by her handmaiden to leave them be. But I was curious and a little frightened. I hid away, watching from afar. Luna Queen was screaming and crying, and I could hear Alpha King shifting and growling. I wasn't sure what was happening, but knowing what he did to my brother and all the other servants, I could only assume the worst." Her voice trailed off as she choked back a sob. "Take your time," Magnolia said with fake sincerity, prompting Sebastian to roll his eyes. Afterwards, they got quiet. "I thought maybe she was dead, just like he killed his ex Luna. He ended up leaving the palace, and then shortly after, she ran from the living room and toward the stairs. She was covered in blood. Her blood." "Why do you think that was?" the judge asked. "What do you think happened?" "I don't know," she breathed, glancing over at Hannah. "But she had a tooth mark on her neck. I'm assuming he bit into her with his teeth." "You think he marked her?" the judge asked, raising his eyebrows. "After all that fighting?" She glanced up at the judge. "I know what I saw," she insisted. "It was teeth marks." The judge motioned for a guard that stood near Hannah. Before Sebastian could protest, the guard was pulling Hannah's hair away from her neck, twisting her head in the process. Hannah winced in pain from the sudden movements of her body, and a pained moan came from her lips. The guard revealed the mark that Sebastian left on her neck for the courtroom to see. The judge studied it for a moment before turning back to Rosalie. "Seems you were right," the judge finally said after a pause. "Luna Queen Hannah was indeed marked." Magnolia scoffed in disgust, but humor danced in her eyes as she leaned back in her seat, taking in the events unfolding before her. "What happened after you saw her mark and she went upstairs?" the judge asked. "She went to her room, the one she shares with Sebastian. I went to see if she was okay, against my better judgment. When I opened the door, she was holding something she grabbed from his nightstand. It looked like a big wand with a dark blue crystal on top of it. I got a strange feeling upon seeing it. It was dark and had mysterious energy that I didn't particularly like. So I left her alone and went to find Queen Magnolia." "Thank you for your time. You can sit down now," the judge told her. She turned slightly and caught the eyes of Sebastian one last time before going back to her seat. Sebastian felt almost sick to his stomach. He knew Hannah didn't steal that scepter, and that Rosalie was lying to get back at him for killing her brother. But he wasn't sure how he was going to prove that just yet. He needed to find that scepter. Hannah had tears streaming down her face as she stared down at her hands. She was probably thinking it was all over for her. It was clear that she had no more fight left in her, and his heart tugged painfully for her. He could only imagine what she must have been feeling at that moment. Not only was she in physical pain, but she was also in emotional and mental pain too. Magnolia seemed to be having a field day with these events. "I'm going to kill her," Eric growled. Sebastian could feel himself about to lose control, and he needed something to distract him before he completely lost it. He focused on Hannah and her features. Bruises or not, she was still so beautiful to him. Her scent was all over the courtroom, and that was the only thing keeping him calm at that moment. He noticed Magnolia and Jack were whispering something to the judge, and the judge looked almost uncertain for a little while as they spoke. Sebastian stood so he could intervene in their conversation. He had to do something before they sentenced Hannah to a lifetime in prison. Or worse, death. Just as the judge stood from the podium about to sentence Hannah, the courtroom doors swung open. Everyone turned to see Dr. Davis standing in the doorway. He was breathless and panting. As he worked to catch his breath, a low growl escaped from the back of Sebastian's throat. "What the hell is he doing here?" Eric growled. Dr. Davis scanned the courtroom before his eyes landed on Hannah. His eyes widened, and he stared at her with shock, appalled at her appearance. Before Sebastian could say anything, Dr. Davis spoke first. "Hannah," he breathed, still trying to catch his breath. "It's your brother. He's missing." Hannah's POV. "What?" I breathed. My heart stopped in my chest as I stared at Dr. Davis's serious expression. My body trembled, and it took everything in my power to not run from the courtroom. My brother was missing. How could this have happened? He wouldn't have just run away like that, would he? No, my father must have done something. He must have gotten to Liam's room and taken him once he found out that he was no longer on his visiting list. That must have been what happened. My heart was squeezing tightly to the point where it was too painful. I could hardly breathe. Nora was impatient, and we needed to get out of here. We needed to find my brother. "What do you mean he's missing?" Sebastian asked for me. "I went to check on him this morning, and he wasn't in his room. We searched everywhere. Nobody saw anyone go in there," Dr. Davis explained, his eyes never leaving my face. I felt like my entire world was crashing down around me. "Why are we delaying the sentencing any further than it needs to be?" Magnolia complained, rudely from across the courtroom. "We aren't announcing any sentences today," Sebastian growled at her. He turned to the judge, narrowing his eyes. "We are putting this trial on hold. It should have never happened this soon." The judge looked a bit panicked, but he didn't argue. He was probably under the impression that Sebastian wanted the trial to be tonight, not knowing that it was set up by Magnolia. I was relieved to find that Sebastian seemed to believe that I didn't steal the scepter. But that relief didn't last long because my brother was missing. I struggled to stand to my feet, the guard tensing from beside me. He was ready to tackle me if I made any sudden movements. "We have to find him," I struggled to say. My voice quivered with weakness, and it pained my chest to speak, but I managed to get their attention. The courtroom was dead silent. I noticed that it was filled with mainly servants, all except for a few, including Caroline. Raya and Arnold sat in the back of the courtroom. I hadn't noticed them up until that moment. She was sitting close to him. She caught my eyes from the far side of the room, and I could see the worry and sadness in her expression. There was a lot she wanted to say. She wasn't used to any of this. A few days ago, we were just students at the Blue Moon Academy, and now we were held up in a courtroom in the king's palace. It was a lot of information for her to handle all at once, and I felt terrible that I was throwing her in the mix of things. If I had it my way, I would have sent her back to Blue Moon where she could resume her normal life. I scanned the courtroom again, and my eyes fell on Rosalie, the maid I knew from around the palace. She was new, and she arrived shortly after her brother arrived. Magnolia killed him in cold blood, and Rosalie was the one who found his body. It tore her apart, not that I could blame her. I understood why she was going against Sebastian and me, but I wanted her to know that she was going against the wrong people. It wasn't Sebastian that killed her brother. It was Magnolia. But would she listen? "The trial will be on hold for a couple of days," Sebastian's voice cut through my thoughts. "I need to find Hannah's brother and bring him to safety. I also need to gather evidence to prove her innocence." "Yes, Your Majesty," the judge agreed. "Fine," Magnolia hissed, standing to her feet abruptly. "But she remains in the dungeon cell. I don't want a thief walking around my palace." "My palace," Sebastian growled. "You lost all rights to calling this your palace the moment I became the Alpha King after my father's passing." She pressed her lips together until they formed a thin line, her eyes darkening as she glared at him. I knew it was hard for her to remain calm during this situation. She wanted to lose control, but she held herself back because she had an image to maintain. Magnolia turned to the guard that stood by my side. "Take her back to the cell," she ordered. The guard nodded and grabbed my arm, pulling me along with him. My eyes found Jack's, and he just stared at me with a sly grin. He gave me chills down my spine, and looking at him made me feel uneasy. I turned away from him and followed the guard, only struggling against him for a moment as I passed Dr. Davis. "He didn't say anything to you recently?" I asked, trying to keep my tone low so only Dr. Davis could hear me. He looked grim, and his eyes were filled with worry as he stared around at my appearance. I could tell he was in shock over how I looked. "I'll come to see you later," he whispered. "There's something I need to give you." Before I could say anything more, the guard was tugging me painfully toward the door. I yelled out in pain, tears burning in my eyes. I hated showing them this kind of weakness. I could tell everybody, including Sebastian, was watching me. I just wanted to disappear. I wanted to disappear with my brother. Sitting in my cell, once again, I felt like I was losing my mind. It was still so dark under the ground, and my entire body was aching. I wanted to shift and get out of there to find Liam, but I couldn't because of the damn cuffs that were locked around my wrists. They were keeping Nora's abilities from me. She was so weak, and I could hardly hear her. I was starting to feel her again slightly, but not enough to be able to speak with her for guidance. I sat against the wall, pressing my knees to my chest and burying my face in my hands as I cried. My body trembled violently. All I could think about was Liam. He must have been so alone and so frightened. I knew it had to have something to do with our father. There's no way Liam would escape on his own. My father broke him out and is keeping him hostage. I thought back to when Liam mentioned that our father told him he could see our mother again. I had an unsettling at the time, and now it was only growing more intense. If my father did something to hurt him, I was going to make him pay. I would make it my life's mission to make him pay. "Hannah?" a familiar voice said through the darkness. I looked up and saw Dr. Davis standing at the doors of my cell. I stared up at him with such worry in my expression. I tried hard to not fall apart right then and there, but I was having trouble holding myself together. "How did you get in here?" I asked, choking back the stream of tears that threatened to escape my eyes. "Sebastian ordered the guards to allow visitors. He doesn't want you to be alone, and he needs to find Liam," he explained. I had to trust that Sebastian knew what he was doing and that he was going to find Liam safe and sound. That's all I could hope for. "I have to give you something," Dr. Davis said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it through the cell doors to hand to me. "It's a note that I found under Liam's pillow. I think he was hoping you would receive it." My heart halted in my chest again as I opened the note. My fingers trembled uncontrollably. I scanned the note and let out a choked-out sob. "What is it?" Dr. Davis asked, watching me curiously and worriedly. "It says he's going to find our mother. Sebastian's POV. Where are you going to go?" Arnold asked as Sebastian stormed out of the courtroom. Everyone was beginning to disperse from the courtroom to resume their duties for the days. He knew Magnolia wasn't happy about the delay in the trial, but he didn't care. He needed to buy himself some time so he could prove Hannah was innocent and convict the ones who were really guilty. As he walked through the foyer toward the front door of the palace, Arnold appeared closely behind him with his new mate, Hannah's friend, Raya, trailing behind. She looked nervous and terrified of everything that was going on around her. He didn't blame her. He almost felt guilty that she was thrown into such trouble. He paused at the front door to turn back to Arnold so he could answer his question. "I need to find Liam," Sebastian told him. "You and Rhea need to stay here. I told the guards to allow visitors. I don't want Hannah to be alone for long. You saw how she looked." Rhea grimaced as Sebastian brought up Hannah's appearance, but she said nothing. "What about you?" Arnold asked. "You don't have any leads." "That might be so, but I guarantee that Hannah's father knows something about Liam's disappearance," Sebastian explained. Rhea looked surprised by his words. This was probably all news to her. He wondered how much of her life Hannah shared with Rhea. "Let me come with you, Your Majesty," Arnold insisted. I can help. No, Sebastian said firmly. You need to stay here with your mate. Arnold glanced over at Raya, who was eyeing him carefully with worry in her eyes. She's been through so much this past week. She shouldn't be left alone either. Arnold knew this, and he wasn't going to argue with Sebastian about it. But Sebastian knew he also cared for the kingdom and wanted to help however he could. You would be doing me a huge favor if you looked after Hannah, Sebastian told him, lowering his tone. I don't trust anyone here besides you. Understand? Yes, Your Majesty, Arnold said with a bow of his head. I won't let you down. Sebastian nodded his thanks to him before leaving the palace. It didn't take him long to get to Alpha Stephen's house. He was only a pack away, and in Sebastian's wolf form, he got there within minutes. Sebastian didn't bother knocking as he got to Stephen's house. Stephen looked shocked to see Sebastian standing in his living room. It's been a while since they encountered one another. The last time Sebastian stood before Alpha, Stephen was when he was saying terrible things to Hannah in the palace, and he was kicked from the palace grounds. From the scent of the home, it didn't seem like anyone else was home. He wondered where Naomi and Amy had gone off to, and why Stephen was alone in their home. Your Majesty? Stephen said, his eyes wide and worried. His breathing had gotten heavy as he took an unsteady step away from Sebastian. What can I do for you? He was trying to remain confident and strong, but his weakness was evident in his features. He knew one thing for sure, though. He didn't smell Liam's scent anywhere in the home. Liam is missing, Sebastian said in a low growl. Stephen's eyes widened even more. He was surprised by the news. And you think I have something to do with it? Stephen asked. I didn't kidnap him. I'm thinking you know where he is, though, Sebastian hissed. Stephen looked taken aback, but Sebastian knew it wasn't genuine. No, Stephen said firmly. I don't. I'm sure Hannah doesn't believe me, though. Did she send you here? You don't speak of my Luna, Sebastian growled. Stephen flinched at his words but said nothing in response. I'm going to search your home. Stephen didn't protest. He allowed Sebastian to roam through his home until he reached Hannah and Liam's old room. It was basically empty because Hannah took everything when she moved to the palace. Not that she had much of anything to begin with. There was a small box on the bed across the room. The box didn't contain much of anything, a couple of old drawings and some notes, but a picture, in particular, stuck out to him. He picked up the picture and saw that it was Hannah, Liam, and their mother. Hannah and Liam were so young, they were in swimming suits. Sebastian recognized the riverbed they were sitting at. It was the river that bordered the rogue town. He knew they lived life as rogue wolves when Alpha Stephen rejected them at birth for being Omegas. Hannah looked a lot like her mother, except it was clear that her mother held so much sadness from just looking at her eyes. Turning the photo over, there was writing on it. It didn't look like either Hannah or Liam's handwriting. It must have been their mother's handwriting. It read, Our Little Paradise. Hannah's POV. Hannah! I heard Raya rushing toward me. She grabbed onto the cell bars and peered at me with misty eyes. Please tell me you're okay. Her voice quivered as she spoke. I felt awful she was witnessing all of this. Raya, I breathed. Arnold was beside her as well, and he also looked at me with a worried expression. I'm glad you stuck by his side, I told her gently. She glanced at him almost nervously before looking back at me. It's a weird feeling, she whispered. Having a mate. Everything that has happened, I'm having trouble trusting anyone, but my wolf is drawn to him. She trusts him and I trust her. You can trust him, Raya, I said, trying my best to give her a reassuring smile. She returned the smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. You look awful, she whispered hoarsely. It looks worse than it feels, I lied. She didn't look like she bought it. Who did this to you? Arnold asked, narrowing his eyes at me. It doesn't matter, I muttered. Nothing matters until we find my brother. I didn't even know you had a brother, Raya breathed. I assumed you had a family, but I didn't really think much of them. Sebastian is going to investigate your father. Do you really think he would kidnap your brother? I haven't told Raya much about my life. I tried to keep it a secret, but it seems everything is unfolding. She was my friend. I shouldn't be keeping these things from her. I'm sorry for not telling you, I told her. My father is an alpha of a different pack. He's not a good man. He rejected my mother for giving birth to my brother and me, a couple of Omegas. She gasped. Her eyes were wide and alert. I had no idea, she breathed. Where's your mother? She passed away when I was young. Liam was born with a disability that is slowly taking from his life. My mother spent most of her time trying to heal him and help him. But since her passing, all he's had was me. My father uses Liam to get me to do his bidding. Liam has been in a hospital for the last few months. My father doesn't like that I'm keeping him from his son, and I wouldn't put it past him to take Liam away. My voice choked as I said those last words. She was silent for a long while, trying to process what I had just said. That's heavy, she said. I nodded once. Raya, you shouldn't be here. I'm sorry for dragging you here and getting you mixed in with everything, I told her sadly. I glanced over at Arnold. You should take her back to Blue Moon. She shouldn't be here. He opened his mouth to say something, but she cut in before he had the chance. I can't go back, she said quickly, tears filling her eyes as she took a step away from me. That man is still there, and I can't go back. She was in a panic as she thought about her attack the other day. I felt like such an idiot. How could I have forgotten something tragic happened to her at Blue Moon? That was the reason she was here, to get away from there and that scarred man. I'm so sorry, I said to her quickly. No, you've had a lot going on. It's okay, she said in a breath. I wanted to say more, but then I remembered the note that Liam had left. My heart tugged painfully as I grabbed the note off the floor of the cell. You said you know where Sebastian is? I asked. They both nodded. I need you to take this note to him. I think it can help him find Liam. Sebastian's POV. What is this? Sebastian asked as he left Hannah and Liam's old room. Alpha Stephen was waiting for him in the living room, staring at the picture Sebastian was holding in his hands. There was a moment of confusion that crossed his face. I don't know, he answered. A picture. It must have belonged to Hannah and Liam. It says that it was their little paradise. Do you know what that means? Sebastian demanded to know. Stephen shook his head, but then he thought about it for a moment. They didn't have a lot growing up, Stephen told him. I wouldn't be surprised if they thought of that river as paradise, like their favorite place or something. Before Sebastian had a chance to say anything more, someone knocked on the door. Stephen looked even more confused and alert. He glanced over at Sebastian worriedly. Expecting more people to search my home? Stephen asked. He didn't wait for Sebastian to answer before he opened the door. Arnold and Raya stood before them. Sebastian was surprised they were standing there. He was so focused on his investigation that he didn't even sense them approaching. Great, Stephen muttered. Just what I needed. More home invaders. Arnold and Raya came into the house. Raya looked a bit freaked out to be in front of Stephen, but she kept her eyes locked on the ground as she walked. Sebastian figured Hannah probably caught her up, and she knew exactly who Stephen was. What are you doing here? Sebastian asked. He initially asked Arnold and Raya to stay with Hannah, because he didn't want her to be alone for long. There's no telling what that asshole Jack would do to her once he figured out she was alone. Is Hannah okay? She's fine, Arnold cut him off. She gave me something to give to you. Sebastian frowned and stared around his serious face. He glanced over at Stephen, who was watching curiously. Not here, Sebastian said, motioning for them to follow him through the house. They walked down the long hallway and back to Hannah and Liam's old room. This is where she grew up? Raya asked, looking around the room. Her face was unreadable. I feel uneasy here. Like the energy is all wrong. It must have been terrible for her to be here. Now that she was mentioning it, the energy did seem a bit off. Like he felt almost weakened in the home, not as strong as he usually is. He brushed the thought out of his mind and focused on Arnold, who was holding a piece of paper. It's a note that Liam left for Hannah, Arnold said, handing the note over. Dr. Davis found it under his pillow at the hospital and gave it to her. She figured, seeming you are the one looking for him, you should have it. It might help you find him. Sebastian couldn't help the growl that escaped the back of his throat at the mention of Dr. Davis. He shouldn't have been surprised that he would be the first to go see Hannah. But he shouldn't be too mad if this note really will help find Liam. Sebastian took the note and read it. Dear Hannah, I'm sick of waiting around for you to return. Dad said he was going to take me to see Mom. but he hasn't come back either. I want to see Mom, so I'm going to find her myself. Don't come looking for me. You said Mom was in paradise, so I'm going there to find her. Love, Liam. His handwriting was hard to read, but Sebastian managed. Paradise? Sebastian breathed as he glanced at the picture he had in his hands. I know where he is. Sebastian, Arnold, and Raya ran through the forest in their wolf forms. Their senses were heightened, and their strength had returned to them after they exited Alpha Steven's home. They ran with great speed. It's not often that Sebastian gets to keep himself in control when he's in his wolf form. Typically, Eric would take over and make him go into a maddening state. But nothing mattered anymore. He knew exactly where Liam had run off to, and they had to get to him before it was too late. They called the riverbed near that rogue town Paradise. Hannah must have told Liam that their mother was somewhere in paradise instead of saying that she was dead. He understood that he had the mental capacity of a child and wouldn't be able to grieve the loss of his mother normally. She was only trying to protect him. However, it gave him a false sense of hope that she was still alive. How much longer? Arnold asked through the wolf's mind link as they continued running. Not long, Sebastian answered. I can hear the river flowing only a few miles away. And you really think he could be there? Arnold asked. Uncertainty lingered in his tone. I don't have any other idea on where he could be, Sebastian admitted. This is a better guess than none. After a short pause, Sebastian added, He could be hurt, so we need to hurry. They picked up speed. He could smell the scent of the rogues not far away. He knew if the rogues caught on to his scent, it would turn into a problem. The rogues didn't typically like the royal family. They lived outside of the kingdom and away from the packs. They were outcasted, mainly made up of Omegas that couldn't fit in with any of their packs. Omega and criminal wolves were outcasted by their packs and by Sebastian. They weren't the type of wolves anyone would want to mess with. However, there was no wolf stronger and bigger than Sebastian, so he wasn't worried that he wouldn't be able to take them. He was far too strong and powerful to let a few rogues get in his way. They broke through the forest and felt the soft breeze of the trees brushing through their thick fur. He felt a few droplets of water spraying at him from the riverbed that sat before them. The aroma of the river enlightened their senses and gave them even more strength. Even though this was dangerous territory, he had to admit that the river was a beautiful sight. He scanned the area carefully, but he didn't see Liam anywhere in sight. Worry started to fill him. Was he wrong? Was Liam not here? He scanned the area, moving closer to the river. The water was foggy and hard to see. He's not here, Arnold said, also scanning the water. Then where else could he have gone? Sebastian hissed, anger boiling through him. It wouldn't be long before Eric lost control, and they went on a rampage. Raya went up a small hill that stood nearby so she could get a better view. She didn't even know what Liam looked like, but she wanted more than anything to find him. Sebastian stumbled backward as defeat started flooding him. He had no other plan. He didn't know what else to do or what to think. Soon, Raya's voice cut through his inner dialogue. You guys, she said, panic in her tone. I think I found him. Somebody hurry! Sebastian sprung to his feet and ran toward her on the top of the hill. He followed her gaze down towards the end of the riverbed. It was a floating body. Sebastian's POV. Sebastian dove into the cold oasis of the river. He was a strong swimmer and was able to swim with the current and quickly reach Liam before he traveled too far down the river and into the ocean. Liam looked to be unconscious and was bobbing up and down the water. He wrapped his arms around Liam's limp body and held him close as he began swimming against the current. It was a lot harder to swim against the current and took him a little longer, but with the strength of Eric, he was able to get toward the edge of the riverbed where Arnold waited for him with a large branch. Sebastian grabbed onto the branch, keeping Liam tucked under his arm, and pulled Liam towards the shore. Raya helped pull Liam out of the water as Arnold helped Sebastian get out of the water. He took in a few steady breaths, trying to catch his breath as he knelt before Liam. He wasn't breathing. He was pale and his body was pruned and raisin-like. Is he dead? Raya asked, tears in her eyes. Sebastian checked for a pulse on Liam's wrist. After a moment, he felt a faint pulse and he breathed out relieved. No, Sebastian told her as he started doing chest compressions. Call 911. Arnold grabbed his phone out of his pocket and immediately called the ambulance. He pressed his palms into Liam's chest with force. Sweat poured from his forehead as the humid air attacked him. Come on, Liam, Sebastian said with each chest compression. Wake up. He pressed his mouth against Liam's and started blowing air into his lungs. He pulled away and restarted the chest compressions. He attempted to blow more air into his lungs once again. Breathe, Liam. Breath, Sebastian whispered as he continued the chest compressions. Soon, Liam began coughing and water poured out of his mouth. His body trembled as it released the water from his lungs. Sebastian sat back, breathing of relief now that Liam was awake. Liam glanced over at Sebastian with a tired expression. He shivered uncontrollably. You had us worried, Sebastian said, catching his breath. Liam looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came to him. He just looked confused and scared. Your sister is going to be happy that you're okay, Sebastian told him, patting him on the back. He flinched at Sebastian's force, making Sebastian pull back apologetically. He didn't always remember how strong he was compared to an average wolf. It didn't take long for them to hear the sounds of an ambulance in the distance. I'll get their attention and show them where we are, Arnold said as he took off towards the road. Raya bent down next to Liam like she was studying him for a short while. You look like her, Raya said with a small smile. Your sister, you look alike. Liam stared back at her, confused because he had never met her before. She pulled away from him and looked over at Sebastian with worried eyes. Is he okay? She asked. He nodded. He's just frightened. I'm sure this isn't easy for him. Once we get him back to the hospital, he will be back to his old self, he assured her. Arnold returned moments later with an ambulance trailing behind him. The EMTs piled out of the ambulance and brought a stretcher over. Liam looked even more frightened as the EMTs attempted to get him to his feet. It's okay, Liam, Sebastian said, trying to sound reassuring. Reassurance was a new approach for Sebastian, and he wasn't sure if he even sounded kind. But it seemed to calm Liam down slightly, and he allowed the EMTs to get him onto the stretcher and into the ambulance. Sebastian, Arnold, and Raya met the ambulance at the King's Hospital, where Dr. Davis was already waiting for them. He looked relieved when he saw Liam, and he directed the EMTs to his room. Once Liam was settled back into his room, he had a doctor take a look at him. He was lucky you got there when you did, Dr. Davis said to Sebastian as he came into the waiting room. Any longer, and it would have been all over for him. We should get back to Hannah, Sebastian muttered, turning away from Dr. Davis. He was grateful that Dr. Davis brought Hannah that note. Without that note, he wasn't sure if he would have put the two together and known that Liam was at the riverbed. But he still didn't like Dr. Davis or trust him. Looking at him made Eric grow indifferent, and he worried longer in his presence that Eric would lose control. He grew worried the longer he stayed away from Hannah. Knowing what Jack did to her was infuriating, and he wouldn't put it past him to try something again if he figures out she was completely alone. Your Majesty, Arnold called after him as they got outside. Sebastian continued to walk through the parking lot toward his car without looking back at Arnold. I saw something when we were at Alpha Stevens' house. Sebastian finally stopped walking to look at Arnold, curiosity impeaching his interest. What did you find? He asked, eyeing him carefully. When we were walking down the hallway, Amy's door was open a crack. Something inside of it was drawing me in. Like a strange energy pull, I poked my head in slightly and saw her backpack. There was something glowing inside of it, Arnold told him. His eyes widened as he processed Arnold's words. I knew I felt something strange there, Raya breathed. The energy was so off. As soon as I entered, it was like my strength was draining. Sebastian felt off too when he was there too, but he was so focused on finding Liam that he didn't really pay attention to it. The moonstone, Eric breathed. The power of the scepter weakens us. It had to have been the scepter. You think Amy stole the scepter? Sebastian asked in return. I think she had some help, but obviously the scepter is in her room. We need to go back, Eric insisted, impatiently. Hannah's POV. It's been a while since I heard from Raya and Arnold. The last I saw of them, they were going to take the note to Sebastian. I couldn't help but wonder if they managed to give him the note and if he figured out where my brother was. I was so worried for him that I could hardly contain myself. I sat against the wall of the cell and buried my face in my hands, allowing tears to soak over my features. My body trembled uncontrollably. I had a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I jumped at the sounds of the dungeon doors snapping open and clamping shut. The forcefulness of the footsteps told me that it wasn't Raya or Arnold that was approaching. The aura felt dark, and a sudden chill went down my spine. I knew almost right away who it was before he made himself known to me at my cell door. Jack peered at me with his darkened eyes and a sly grin spread across his lips. I shivered again. His presence was unsettling for me. "What do you want?" I whispered, trying to keep the fear out of my tone, but I knew I was failing miserably. "I just came to tell you the news. I'm assuming nobody has been here yet," he said, his grin widening. "What news?" I asked. I had a sinking feeling. "The news about your brother," he told me. I felt my heart stopping at his chest as I stared around his face. He seemed so serious, even though there was a hint of humor dancing in his eyes. I couldn't tell if this was real or not, but panic started to consume me at the mention of Liam. "What do you know?" I asked firmly, keeping my eyes locked on his. "Sebastian seemed to have found him," Jack said, turning his head away as he started to disappear into the shadows. "He's dead." Hannah's POV. Liam's dead. That's all I could think about as blackness clouded my vision. My body was numb to any attacks. I knew of the damages done, and I couldn't shield myself. I saw the anger portrayed in his features as he leaned over me. Every punch to my stomach, every swipe to my face, it felt like I was immune to them. I kept waiting for the pain to set in, but it never came. My already weakened body faded from me together, and I could no longer feel the faint presence of my wolf. My breathing became shallow. I typically would have tried to gasp for breath. I would have tried to stay alive, but I had nothing more to live for. My brother was dead, and I was dying alongside him. I wondered if he was alone when he died. I wondered if it was painful or if it was quick. I wondered if he thought of me at all as he took his last breath. I was losing grip on reality. Jack was stained with my blood. I wanted to spit into his face and tell him to take the rest of my life. But I knew he was going to do that regardless. I just had to wait for the final blow. The blow that would end it all. All the pain, the troubles, the heartbreak, the disappointment. I just wanted it all to end. I closed my already swollen eyes, and I thought I saw a small image of my brother. He stood before me and looked so well. He looked healthy and happy. He looked like himself, but so much better. He reached an arm out for me to take his hand. I reached toward him. Feeling the softness of his fingers against mine, I knew from the look he was giving me that everything was going to be all right. That soon, everything would be over. Darkness clouded me, and reality slipped away. Sebastian's POV. "You should go back to Hannah," Sebastian said as they reached Alpha Stephen's house. "I can do this on my own." "What if he tries to fight you?" Arnold asked. "You're going to need backup." "You don't think I can handle him on my own?" Sebastian asked, narrowing his eyes at his beta. Arnold looked sheepish for a moment. "If he has the moonstone scepter, then probably not," Arnold told him, honestly. "You felt it too when we were here earlier. Something happened to us where we felt weak. You can use as much help as you can get." Sebastian knew that Arnold was speaking the truth. But he couldn't help but worry about Hannah and the fact that she was all alone and vulnerable in the dungeon. He didn't trust anybody there, and he wanted to make sure she was safe. He supposed this wasn't going to be a long mission. Once he got the moonstone scepter back, he would be back to Hannah. He wanted to see for himself that she was truly all right. He didn't bother knocking on the door. He walked in like he owned the place. This time he got the scent of both Naomi and Amy in the house, along with Stephen. They all jumped to their feet, startled to see Sebastian standing before them. "You're back," Stephen said, eyeing him carefully with wide and worried eyes. "Did you find Liam?" "We need to search your house again," Sebastian said, keeping his tone even. "I already told you, we don't know where Liam is." Stephen tried to argue, but Sebastian put his hand up, silencing him. What is this all about? Naomi asked. There was a bit of nervousness in her tone as she glanced over at Amy. Amy's face was reddened, and Sebastian could nearly hear her rapid beating heart. I think you already know what this is about, he said, addressing Amy and Naomi. Amy hurriedly ran to her room with Sebastian trailing behind her closely. She blocked the door before he could enter. He could see the panic crossing her face. Just from being near her room, he could sense the scepter was inside. Eric felt weak to the scepter. The powers were too much for him to handle. It was why he used it during the full moon. It was the only thing that could weaken his strength and make the chains in the dungeon unbreakable. It was almost like he was a slave to that scepter, and he needed it back. He wasn't leaving without it. Eric's rising anger was becoming evident in Sebastian's eyes as he stared down at Amy. She looked frightened, but not enough to step out of the way. I don't know what you think you're doing, but... Naomi tried to say, but her words trailed off as Sebastian snapped his head in her direction to glare at her. He turned back to Amy, curling his lip up as he snarled at her. Step aside, he growled in a deep and low tone. Her body was visibly trembling, but she stood her ground. She kept a hold on the door handle to keep herself leveraged. He clenched his fists, trying to keep himself from shifting. All he was seeing at that moment was blood, and Hannah wasn't there to calm him. I said step aside, he said again, more threatening. It's best you do what he says, Arnold warned from a distance. She sucked in a sharp breath, and then Alpha Stephen's voice cut through the hallway. For God's sake, Amy, get out of his way, he hissed. Amy flinched at her father's words. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized how much trouble she was going to get in. She glanced over at Naomi, who seemed unmoved. Soon, Amy sighed and took a step away from the door. Sebastian shoved past her, nearly knocking her into the doorframe as he invaded her room. He saw the backpack Arnold was referring to right away. He was right. It had a faint blue glow coming through the zippers. The closer he got to it, the more he could feel the scepter. He could feel the powers of the scepter leaking through the backpack. It was calling for him. He was surprised he didn't feel it this strongly when he was there earlier. But maybe he just wasn't close enough to it. Sebastian grabbed the backpack and unzipped it. The moonstone scepter was poking out, and it looked unharmed to Sebastian's immediate relief. This also meant that he had proof that Hannah wasn't the one who stole the scepter. He tightened his hold around the scepter and turned to Amy, fury boiling through him, making his features red through his mask. Why do you have this? He demanded to know. She looked too frightened to speak. Naomi appeared behind her daughter, and Stephen came in shortly after. We can explain this, Naomi said. I should have known you had something to do with this too, Sebastian hissed to her. Why would you take this? We were never planning on using it. The powers were too much for us. We tried to store it away, but it kept appearing out of nowhere. Eventually, we stuck it in the backpack until we could figure out what else to do with it, Naomi admitted, her voice trembling slightly as she looked into Sebastian's scarlet eyes. That didn't answer my question, he growled. Why did you have this? It wasn't our idea, Amy blurted, tears falling down her cheeks and soaking her features. Naomi nudged her painfully, but Amy didn't stop speaking. We were told to do this, she said in a sob. By whom? Sebastian shouted. Your ex Luna, she said quickly, despite Naomi's warning looks. Emily. Change of plans, Sebastian growled as he stormed out of Alpha Stephen's house. I need you to stay here with these assholes. Call for my warriors to collect them and bring them to the jail. Yes, Your Majesty, Arnold said right away. What are you going to do? I have to see Emily. It didn't take long for Sebastian to get to the hospital. He hasn't been by to see Emily in a few weeks, not since Hannah went to Blue Moon. Ever since she told Hannah that she was pregnant with his baby, he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. He barged into Emily's room. Thankfully, she was alone. She was startled to see him, but her expression quickly turned into excitement. Sebastian, she said cheerfully as he walked into her room. I wasn't expecting you. I'm not here for a social visit, he said to her, his voice hardening. She frowned and stared around his serious face. What's going on? She asked. Why did you do it, Emily? He asked. She was supposed to be a longer-term friend, someone he once trusted. She was there for him during a lot of his childhood, and he thought he owed her so much. But now, looking at her, he was coming to realize that she took advantage of him. She was never in any actual trouble. This was all part of some big plan that she's been scheming, and he felt stupid to have fallen for something like that. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, innocently. But he could see the deviousness in her eyes as he stared at her. "You know exactly what you did," he said in a low tone, trying to keep himself and his wolf under control. "Where do I begin? You told Hannah you were pregnant with my baby. You know damn well I haven't touched you." She was silent as her face reddened. "I can explain that," she said. He could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to come up with an excuse for her actions. "Don't bother," he hissed. "I don't want to hear your excuses, but I would like to know why you made Naomi and Amy steal my scepter." Her breathing got caught in her throat as she stared up at him, her eyes growing wide and alert as she realized she had been caught in the action. There was no talking her way out of this. "I didn't make them do anything," she tried to say. "Stop lying to me," he roared. She flinched at the sound of her tone, and she fell silent. She was growing frightened of him. She was looking at him the same way that she looked at him the day she left when they were young, when she told him she was going to study abroad. Now he was wondering if that was a lie too. "I already know the truth. So, you might as well tell me everything," he said to her, keeping his tone low. Tears welled up in her eyes as she pulled her gaze away from him and stared down at her hands. He could tell she was embarrassed and wasn't sure where to begin, so he waited quietly. "I love you," she finally whispered after a long pause. "It's not fair that you chose her as your mate instead of me." "You left," he growled. "You have no right to be upset about anything. You were the one who walked out on me." "Do you blame me?" She spoke loudly. "You disappear for months and return all disfigured and mean. You were ugly on the inside and the outside. I left because I was afraid. I feared you more than I loved you." She paused to take a breath. "But I'm back now. I want to prove that I can be what you need and want. I can be better than her." "No," he said firmly. "You will never be anything like her." He turned to walk out of the room. He had nothing more to say to her. He was disgusted that he was even in her presence at that point. He needed to find Hannah and get her out of that cell before Jack finds out she's alone and hurts her. "Sebastian!" Emily cried, tears flooding down her narrow features. "Please don't walk away from me. Not like this." "I have nothing to say, Emily," he hissed. "You crossed the line. There's no coming back from that." He slammed the door as he left, but he could hear the faint sounds of her sobbing as he stood in the hallway, trying to clear his mind. He shook the thought out of his head as he got outside. Just as he stepped out of the hospital, his phone began ringing. He groaned as he looked at the caller ID and saw that it was Magnolia. "What?" he growled as he answered the phone. "We can't delay the trial any longer. We are going to have it now, whether you are here or not," she told him, keeping her voice emotionless. "I found the scepter," he said. "Hannah didn't steal it. I have warriors coming to take the ones responsible." She was quiet on the other end for a while. Sebastian was about to hang up when she started speaking again. "You found the moonstone scepter?" she breathed. He didn't respond. He wasn't willing to speak to her about the scepter. "Bring it to me," she ordered. He wanted to almost laugh out loud. He would never present to her the scepter. In fact, he was going to hide it somewhere she would never get her hands on it. The scepter was the most powerful object on the planet. If it got into the wrong hands, there's no telling what kind of damages could be done. He would never give the scepter to Magnolia. "You're never going to get that scepter, Magnolia," he told her. "Someone as unstable as you shouldn't hold an object as powerful as the moonstone scepter," she growled. "As your stepmother, I demand." "You have no power over me," Sebastian hissed in return. "I allow you to stay at the palace because it's what my father would have wanted. But you have no power over me. I will not give you the scepter." She scoffed. "You will give it to me if you care for the rest of your servants," she said. Her tone was icy, and it gave Sebastian an unsteady feeling. He didn't know what she meant. "What are you planning on doing?" he asked. "I'll kill every last one of them until you hand over the scepter. she said with a slight chuckle. "Starting with your Luna's handmaiden. I know they've grown close. It'd be a shame if something happened to her." "Magnolia," Sebastian roared. "Don't you dare." Before he could finish his sentence, the line went dead. Sebastian didn't waste any more time. He shifted into his wolf form and ran from the hospital to the palace. He feared the worst. He just hoped that he would get to the palace in time. As he ran toward the palace, Arnold mind-linked him to tell him that the guards have collected Naomi and Amy. But there was no proof that Stephen was involved, so they left him alone. Sebastian told Arnold to get to the palace as soon as he can. Sebastian broke through the doors of the palace just as Arnold and Raya arrived as well. They were panting from the run and confused as to why they needed to rush back. Magnolia was nowhere in sight, but he could smell her presence somewhere in the palace. Then he smelled something else. Blood. The smell of blood only grew much stronger as he busted through the doors of the living quarters. He stared at the body that lay on the floor, blood draining from her flesh and oozing into the carpet. He was too late. Caroline was dead. Sebastian's POV. "Oh, my moon goddess!" Raya breathed as she stared down at the dead body in the middle of the living quarters. "Who is that?" "Hannah's handmaiden," Sebastian said gravely as he knelt next to her body. Her heart was ripped out and she had scratches all along her body. She lay in a pool of her own blood. It was still fresh, and her body was still warm, so it was a recent killing. He lifted her arm to check for her pulse, but there was none. She was dead. "I didn't know she had a handmaiden," Raya whispered. "Were they close?" "Yes," Sebastian told her. "Hannah didn't have any friends growing up, and the stupid girl ended up befriending a servant." Sebastian shook his head with dismay as he stood to his feet. The door of the living quarters swung open, and he heard a loud squeak coming from the girl that stood at the doorway. He turned to see that servant, Valerie, standing there and staring down at Caroline's dead body. Tears began welling in her eyes instantly, and her body was visibly trembling. "What?" she breathed, trying to form a sentence. "Oh, dear Lord." Tears escaped her eyes and fell down her cheeks as she stared up at Sebastian. At first, she looked like she wanted to run. He didn't have a good reputation, and her first thought was probably that he did this. But as she continued to stare at him and she stared around his appearance, she was realizing he didn't have any blood on him. She glanced over at Arnold and Raya as if she were to ask them for the truth, but she remained silent. She sighed out, defeated as she stared back down at Caroline. "Go get some other servants to clean this up," Sebastian ordered her, trying to keep his tone even as he turned to leave the living quarters. He paused at the door and turned back to Valerie's paling face. "And take the rest of the evening off," he told her before leaving the room. Raya and Arnold hesitantly followed him. As soon as they left, they could hear Valerie sobbing. He knew they were close and that it would be hard for her to move on from something like this. It was going to be even harder for Hannah once she finds out what happened. Before he went to see Hannah, he wanted to face Magnolia. He was furious that she would stoop to such low levels and kill his servants over the moonstone scepter. He wasn't going to let her get away with this, and he certainly wasn't going to allow her to do this again. He was going to go find her, but she ended up finding him first. "I see you saw my little gift," she said, her tone icy cold as she slowly came down the steps. "Consider that a warning." "You are never going to get the scepter," he hissed to her. He could feel the madness taking over. Eric wasn't playing around this time. He was going to escape and tear Magnolia apart, limb by limb. She didn't look frightened or faced by his darkening aura and scarlet eyes. She looked more bored than anything. "Then I'll just have to kill more maids," she said with a sly grin. She glanced over at Raya. "Or I'll kill her." Raya tensed and took an unsteady step backward as Magnolia lunged forward. A small scream escaped Raya's lips as fear overcame her. Arnold was in front of Raya before Magnolia had the chance to even go near her, and Sebastian was in front of Magnolia. He screamed out in anger, grabbing onto her neck and holding her tightly in his grip. She choked out, gasping for breath. Her face was reddening as her hair was being taken from her. She struggled against him. His nails were digging into her neck. He could feel the blood trickling down the nape of her neck and oozing onto his hands as he lifted her off the ground. He curled his lip up in disgust as he stared around her face. She attempted to pry his fingers away from her neck, but it only made him tighten his grip even more. Soon she stopped struggling and her body started going limp. She was growing tired, and he was ready to shift and rip the rest of her throat out. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, the doors of the basement swung open, and Jack stood in the foyer, staring at the fight between his mother and Sebastian. Sebastian glanced at him, noticing his presence nearby. He was covered in blood. His clothes were completely ruined from the blood stains, and the stains on his skin looked fairly fresh. This made Sebastian loosen his grip around Magnolia's neck and allow her to fall to the ground. She coughed, rubbing her sore neck, gagging for a breath of air. She was trying to gain as much air as she possibly could. "You might want to stop fighting my mother and go check on your precious Luna," Jack spat. "What did you do to her?" Sebastian demanded to know, running through the foyer and past him to get to the basement door. "Nothing," he said, but he didn't sound convincing. "She's just not breathing." That bastard. Sebastian hated himself for letting Hannah be alone for that long. She shouldn't have left her like this. He ran down the stairs and he could instantly feel that something wasn't right. He didn't feel it earlier because the chains that bound her wrists blocked her from him, but now that he was getting closer to her, he could feel her strength, and she wasn't okay. Her wolf was almost calling out to him and begging for him to help her. His body was nearly trembling as he barged through the doors of the dungeon. He soon smelled her blood. It was potently in the air, and he froze for a moment, grasping what was going on. His heart was beating violently against his chest. Eric was no longer angry at everyone around them, but he was worried. He had never been this scared before in his life, and now all he could think about was Hannah being in danger, and it is his fault. His heart tugged painfully as he thought about the condition she was in earlier at the trial. He could only imagine the kind of condition she was in currently. He had to take a deep breath to calm his nerves before he continued to run through the dungeon until they reached her cell. He was praying to the moon goddess that Jack was lying and that she was all right. But telling from the fact that Jack had her blood all over him, and the dungeon reeks of her blood, he knew she wasn't okay. It was too dark in the cell for him to see properly. He unlatched the cell and pulled the doors open so he could enter. As soon as he entered, he fell to his knees, falling into a puddle of Hannah's blood. Hannah lay before him, blood and bruised. It looked like she was dead. Sebastian was trembling violently as he held Hannah's unconscious body. She was still not breathing, but she had a faint pulse, so he knew she was still alive, but he wasn't sure how much longer she could stay alive. Thankfully, the EMTs arrived quickly. Arnold had come downstairs shortly after Sebastian and saw that Hannah wasn't well. He called 911 immediately to get an ambulance. Sebastian was trying to remain strong for Hannah. He knew if he fell apart, no good would come from that. He was the king, and he needed to be strong for not only himself and Hannah, but his kingdom as well. He couldn't let them see him break. But he didn't want to let Hannah go. He held her close to him, and he could smell her scent through her blood. Her body was still so warm, and it provided his wolf such tranquility. Her mouth was hanging open slightly with no air escaping her lips. But staring at her full and beautiful lips, he just wanted to kiss them. He worried he would never be able to kiss them again, that he would never hear her voice or her laughter again, that she would never smile at him again. He could feel her sunshine fading, despite how hard to hold on to it. "Your Majesty, we need to take her to the hospital," one of the EMTs said as Sebastian continued to hold on to her body tightly. He pulled his eyes away from her and stared up at the EMT. "You protect her," Sebastian ordered. "You make sure she says alive." "We will do our best," the EMT assured him, but Sebastian didn't feel so sure. Reluctantly, Sebastian stood to his feet, still holding her in his arm. She was so light to him, she practically weighed nothing. He shakily placed her on the stretcher, rubbing the back of his thumb down her smooth and delicate cheek. She made no notice of him. She wasn't there. She was just a shell of a wolf, and he was fearing that he was never going to get her back again. Please, he whispered to her as he brought his lips closer to hers. Don't die. He pressed his lips gently on her, tasting her one last time before he watched them take her away. Arnold and Raya stood by his side, Raya covering her mouth to keep from sobbing. For the most part, Arnold had kept her from seeing Hannah's body the way it was. But she still got a glimpse of her as they were taking her away. She shrieked at the appearance of Hannah and burst into tears almost right away. She turned away, covering her mouth to keep from sobbing even louder. Sebastian didn't waste much more time in the dungeon. He resurfaced back to the foyer and saw that both Jack and Magnolia were gone. Their scent was completely gone, so he knew they weren't in the palace. He was furious with them. Those cowards left knowing they did this to her. He didn't have time to go seeking them, though. He needed to get to the hospital and be with Hannah. As he got to the hospital, Dr. Davis was already waiting for him. There were questions and accusations clear in his eyes. Sebastian wasn't in the mood, and with one look Dr. Davis knew to keep quiet. I need to see her, Sebastian barked to him. She's in surgery, Dr. Davis answered. She's facing a lot of internal damages. I didn't do this, Sebastian growled before Dr. Davis had a chance to say anything accusatory. I didn't say you did, Dr. Davis said with a frown, furrowing his eyebrows together. You were thinking it, Sebastian said, narrowing his eyes. I was thinking she's lucky to be alive. Let's just pray that she stays that way, he told him. Sebastian couldn't argue with that. He was shaking with fury as he paced back and forth around the waiting room. It felt like hours had gone by as he continued to wait. He wanted to go after Jack. He needed to go after him and make him pay for what he's done. If Hannah doesn't come out of this alive, he was going to make sure Jack paid the ultimate price. Dr. Davis returned after a couple of hours. He looked exhausted. She's alive, he said in a breath. Surgery went well. She's still asleep, though. She's going to need more rest before we allow any visitors. Sebastian didn't say anything. He sat down, burying his face in his hands. He felt defeated, and he felt even more helpless. Hannah needed him, and he wasn't there for her. How could he have let this happen? You should go and get some rest, Arnold said, sitting beside him. We can stay here, and if there's an update, we will let you know. Sebastian shook his head, not looking at him. I can't leave her, Sebastian said. Not again. I know you want to go find Jack, Arnold said, a bit more firmly. He should pay for what he did to her. Sebastian lifted his head as Eric's fury started rising. Arnold was right. He needed to go find Jack and make him pay for this. He clenched his fists together, trying to keep himself calm while he was in the hospital. Honestly, go, Arnold told him. We will be fine here. Sebastian stood and ran from the hospital without another word. He didn't know where to even start searching for Jack, but he went to the palace just in case he returned home. To his surprise, he didn't pick up on Jack's scent, but he did smell Magnolia's. She was in the palace when he arrived. She folded her arms across her chest and kept her distance from him, probably worried that he was coming back to finish the job. I didn't kill any other maids, she told him quickly before he could get a word out. Where's Jack? He roared, his voice echoing off the walls of the foyer. She narrowed her eyes at him. I won't tell you where my son is, she told him, shaking her head. You can kill me, I don't care, but I'm not giving up my son. Tell me, Magnolia, he growled as he lunged toward her. She flinched, waiting for the impact. He saw her neck was still red and swollen from when he grabbed her earlier. He paused as he reached her, glaring at her with the scarlet of his eyes. She stared up at him with her own large and wild gaze. I refuse to, she started to say. Soon, he felt a wave of power going through him. He wasn't sure what was happening. The power seemed to be too great for him to handle. Just as he felt it earlier in Alpha Stephen's home, he felt his strength weakening. It was the power of the moonstone. He was calling to him, pulling him and tugging him, draining him of his strength and filling him with the strength of the scepter. He felt the powers surging through his body, and Eric screamed out in agony as the burning sensation of the stone was overcoming them. He couldn't take his eyes away from Magnolia, though. He wasn't sure what was happening to his eyes, but he saw a hazy blue shielding his vision, nearly blinding him. Magnolia kept her eyes locked on his. She was entranced by him, unable to look away. Her eyes started turning a light blue as she continued to stare at him. He was doing something he couldn't control. Despite how hard he was trying to pull away from her, she was locked onto his eyes, and her eyes were shifting into something unrecognizable. "It's the moonstone." Eric panted painfully, trying to break free of the stone. "It's taking over. I can't control it." Sebastian was frozen in his place as he watched Magnolia's eyes darkening slightly. "He's hiding in the woodland forest." Magnolia breathed. It was clear she was still in a trance. She spoke like a robot, and her eyes were still locked onto his. Somehow, whatever was happening got her to tell him the truth. "Where is he planning on going?" Sebastian found himself asking. "He wants to gather an army of rogues to take you down," she said automatically.